Okay, so here's another example. We're back to a little bit of wildlife, landscape, and we're kind of revisiting an old kind of issue that I seem to have that recurs a lot in nature, which is a white balance that doesn't work on the sky, but it works on the land, or it works on the land and doesn't work in the sky. So we're gonna get into that in a second. So since I'm taking off for the Galapagos in a couple days, I thought we'd use a Galapagos photograph. So here is a mother and baby sea lion returning back to the ocean on the island of Española in the Galapagos Islands. And as far as a crop goes, I want to keep this an open, airy, landscape-driven type of an image that feels wild. You know, there are places on this earth that don't feel wild anymore, but somehow photographs can tell that story. And remember that photography is all about visual storytelling. Sometimes a photograph is accompanied with a video or somebody narrating the photograph or talking about it, but often we just have photographs that are floating around the internet that don't have a narrative. And so I try to take images that will kind of self-explain what's going on, where they are in the world or in their environment. So I don't want to crop that out. I really don't want to do that. So what I will do is let's find a white balance that I think is a good balance between sky and land. And in a previous tutorial, we talked about how we can warm or cool off a gradient that we put somewhere. And we're going to rely on that quite a bit on this image. So why don't we find a white balance that looks good maybe on the land. So I like this kind of warmer, beautiful evening sun that's coming towards the lens. And as a wildlife photographer, this is a little bit of a side topic to processing, but I love it when I have a sun off of about 45 degrees off axis to my subject, where I can photograph the subject, get the shadows coming towards me, but not at me without a sunburst or a lens flare coming from the lens or the sun. And I like this because those long shadows help create more dark areas in a scene and more drama without it being flat and midday where you can increase the blacks, but there's no shadows to do it on, so it ends up being in the wrong places. So in this image, I want to accentuate that warm glow on the mother's chest. The land looks all nice and beautiful, but maybe the sky looks a little bit too warm, especially those clouds, and maybe the blue sky behind it. So I have to kind of create techniques to kind of correct for that. And I recognize that one white balance for everything isn't always appropriate. So let's maybe stick with this 6,500 degree odd white balance for the overall scene. And later on, I might cool off that sky just a little bit to try to return back to a more realistic looking sky. So here we have a warm land and sky. Let's select a white that works. Now, I am blowing out the sky on the upper left-hand side, but I'm going to use a gradient that'll be pulling that back at some point. So I'm going to still bring this to the edge of being blown out. Now let's set our black point. These are more of a silhouette where I'm just as interested in what's going on around them, but also the shape is driving this photograph for me. The shape of these two sea lions will help separate them from the background. Notice how there's a nice set of sandy beach right behind them. It's a nice continuous tone subject. Kind of helps draw them out and make their shape stand out. So we'll set a black point. It's a little, I'd say pulled back a little bit. Maybe an exposure that's just a little bit more than where it was by default. I'm going to bring some of these highlights back in the sky globally because there are no real highlights anywhere else, or there are some, but they're not as important, like maybe the surf where it's breaking on the edge of the beach. And shadows. I'll bring the shadows up just a little bit. I do want a little more detail of what's going on her side, but I wanted that dark black point to be an anchor. That was really important to me. So often I'll set a more aggressive black and then I'll pull open the shadows a little bit to separate them out. So I have both. I have contrast in those deep areas without giving up all shadow. I do like a little shadow detail when it's important. And so I will make the black blacker and then open up the shadows to kind of pull them apart. Now, I'm not going to use any clarity on this scene. There's nowhere in here where I think more clarity is actually needed. So I'm going to avoid global or even painting clarity. But I might do it on the gradient on the sky. So let's get into the gradient. We talked about this earlier, using a gradient to both darken the sky as well as make that sky a different hue. So I'm going to start my gradient about right here, holding down the shift key. That shift key, remember, makes it straight. So we're going to bring it down. Then I'm going to bring that exposure down, bring it down, maybe a full stop, maybe some of those highlights a little bit more. But if I bring the highlights down too much, I think the image looks unnatural. I mean, I think we expect that as we look towards the sun, that area of the sky is bright. Why do we want to mess with it? It looks fake. Why make it look like something like this? Doesn't look right. So let's bring this down about a stop and then bring those highlights back just a little bit. Now that we've kind of changed the overall luminance of that sky, let's look at a temperature adjustment on that sky to try to see what looks a little more pleasing. A little warmer, a little bit cooler. That cooler is looking kind of good for my eyes, but we're still enjoying warm highlights in those clouds. For me, I'm after a little bit bluer sky. So I'm going to bring that temperature adjustment to the left a little bit. Not too much, just enough, like -12, where I'm getting those blue skies again behind there, but I still have the warm sky and warm clouds, basically. That's what I'm after. And I just noticed one thing that I think I want to change. I skipped over it, and there is one element on the beach that I think I would like to have removed. It's just a little too close to my subject. So I'm going to zoom in there, and I'm going to grab that healing brush, and I'm just going to take it out. This is something I didn't notice earlier. So why don't we just quickly find a source area, and we will remove it, and all is looking good, and we're going to zoom back out. It's all done. And I think to finish off the image, I would like to do a little more of a vignette, but I might investigate actually working on the inside of the circle. So why don't we take a radial filter, and I'm going to just draw on our two subjects here. And clicking on invert mask means that it's on the inside of the area, and I will increase the shadows by just a little bit, just a hair, just a little bit, just so I can get a little bit more detail in there. But I still have those blacks, and if I didn't have enough blacks, I could always increase the shadows and bring those blacks down a little bit. But I think it'll look a little too crunchy if I do that. So let's open up the shadows. It's starting to affect way out here a little too much, and I can look at the overlay and see that it's working way outside of what I want. So I can take the brush. Remember, I've got that minus ability, and I can paint it outside of my subjects. And I'm okay getting really close to the subject with this circle because there aren't many shadows on the sand. I don't have to be exact about it. It doesn't really matter. And there we go. I removed all the rocks, and now it's just those two subjects, getting a little bit of shadow treatment from the radial filter. Let's see if there's anything else in here. You know, I might return back and do a little bit more of a minus exposure on that sky. Maybe 1.5 stops. Try to give it a little bit more drama. And to finish off the image, let's look at the sharpening. Just like before, we create a mask. We create a mask. And don't think that I never, ever adjust the sharpening amount or the radius. It's just that I will usually do the standard, make a print with a standard output sharpening, make an evaluation if it needs more, and then adjust for it. And depending on the amount of frequency of changes in the photograph, meaning how much detail is there. Like, let's say there's a big difference between this photograph and, say, a field of waving wheat where their changes very frequent. If the changes are really frequent, I will move the radius lower than 1.0, probably down to 0.7, to compensate for that smaller radius needed to sharpen all the smaller things in a scene. I found that 1.0 is perfectly appropriate for most everything that I do, but not everything. Sometimes there's just such small details in a scene, especially with these higher and higher capture devices. You know, we've moved to these 36 and 50 megapixel cameras in the last couple of years, that things just get more and more acute. And that's great. But often I'm only making an adjustment for the mask. And a little bit of tidbit on this. This happened to be from a point and shoot Sony camera that I had sitting in my pocket as we were about to get in our Zodiac to go back to our ship. And these two sea lions just happened to walk out. So sometimes the best photograph you have is the only one you have with you. It doesn't have to be a big, long telephoto lens, just a little tiny subcompact. So there we have this image processed fairly quickly, mostly doing adjustment balances between the sky and the land.